So we are going to launch into 1 Peter this morning. And, of course, we don't have to cover as much territory every day as we do verse-wise as we do in the Psalms. It doesn't mean today we're just going to look at these opening verses because I want to give some background. I never want this in any way when we gather together every morning to get into the scriptures. I don't want it ever to become some sort of academic thing where what we're looking to do is simply feed our intellect. But having understanding is in our, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Understanding the scripture, understanding what is being communicated should translate to our lives, to us walking this out. And so my heart's desire every day is that as we get into the Word, that we would enter in saying, Lord, what do you want to speak to me today? What is the food that you have, the spiritual food that you have for me today? And so today as we begin 1 Peter, obviously I want to give a little bit of background, historical kind of background, context for what we're looking at so that we have a picture, because this is a real letter. It's a real letter to real people. Typically, I would encourage you, and even I'd thought about doing this, but I'm not going to. But I would encourage you, whenever I read like an epistle, I think it's great to read the whole thing in one setting first, because that's how it would have been read. It's a letter. It's a letter to real people, to real congregations. That are in a real historical context, going through real stuff. And it doesn't feel like in that moment that it's somehow, when you're going through it, it doesn't feel like, and you don't know what the other side of it looks like, it doesn't feel like somehow this is going to be, in the books, in the history books, or they wouldn't have thought this is going to be in the Bible. This is, as far as they understood, this was a letter of encouragement, and it's a pastoral letter. It's obviously written by Peter, and it's such a relevant letter. I mean, all of the books are, right? I mean, but this feels particularly relevant because what you're looking at a letter that's being written to people that are being persecuted, and some of it can be state persecution, by the Roman Empire, but on another level, it's more of what they're facing on a daily basis, in a very local way, and so Peter writes this letter to them in the midst of their suffering, in the midst of the difficulties. About basically, how do we walk this out? How do we walk out our faith in this context? And the thing that we'll see as we go through Peter, the thing that always jumped out at me actually at the beginning of this pandemic, when I'd mentioned earlier that the Lord had really, two things that he had really put on my heart early on in this was the book of Jeremiah and then Peter's letters. And I kept hitting this phrase, and it may have only been a couple times, it just leapt off the page at me, where Peter writes, "It's to this you were invited, to this you were called." And it takes me back to that picture of when he was called, "Follow me." When the Lord said to him, when they're in the boat, and then he says, "Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men." You think it's about fish. You think fish are a big deal, a boat full of fish. I'm going to make you fishers of people. Follow me. It's to this you were invited. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. And so when you hit those moments, when you hit the moments of discouragement, when you hit all of that stuff and you say, where are you? What's going on? I'm outnumbered. I feel alone here. The letter says, don't forget, to this you were invited. And so we open up, and again, we're just going to look at this at the opening verses here, and it's Peter, an emissary of Messiah Yeshua, to the sojourners of the diaspora in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, chosen. Now, and chosen's obviously going to lead into the next verse. It opens up, obviously, Peter introducing himself with his the name that Yeshua had given him. You are Peter. You are rock, or Kephas, and on this rock I will build my congregation. And he opens up Peter, an apostolus, a sent one, right? A sent one, an emissary. It's apostello means to send, and so in when you look in earlier Greek literature, earlier in the development of the word, to send, apostello meant to send away from, almost to banish, to send off, to dispatch, gone. And it had actually kind of a negative connotation early on, the word to send, like to dispatch, to banish. But it eventually morphed into something that had more of a positive view, more of a positive understanding. It began to speak of one who had been dispatched as an ambassador, as an emissary, who had been sent as a representative away from home, away from that which is normal, away from that which is familiar, to a land that is foreign. And so he opens up by saying, it's me, Peter, one who has been sent, one who has been in many ways banished, but not in a negative way, dispatched, sent one by the Lord, and sent of Messiah Yeshua, an apostle of Yeshua the Messiah, sent of him, dispatched by him. Now, in our version, the word chosen is kind of tagged at the end of the verse, right? When you read it here, it says, to the sojourners of the diaspora in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia, chosen. And that word is actually put here, right here, between Peter, an apostle of Messiah Yeshua, and after that and before, to the sojourners, to the aliens, as it were, to those who are outsiders. And right in between there is the word eklektos, chosen, selected. And of course, in our language, you hear when I say eklektos, it has to do with, we think of the word eclectic, right? So when you have, you say, well, my style is eclectic, it's kind of a choosing of different styles to bring together to make kind of a beautiful whole. That's our picture of eclectic. It's not eclectic if the whole room is one particular style and then you have something that doesn't fit. That's not being eclectic. Eclectic is nothing matches and therefore everything matches. That's the chosen style. So that's sort of the picture that to have in mind as well when you think of chosen. But it has to do with being chosen, being selected, picked out. And so the question is, who's chosen here? Who is this? This is modifying which? Is this Peter, an apostle of Messiah Yeshua, chosen? Or is this Peter, an apostle of Messiah Yeshua, to the chosen ones, to the ones chosen, the sojourners, to those who are you're chosen as aliens? Who is it go to? And the answer is, in my opinion, is yes. It's sort of like it's put where it's put so it can modify both. That Peter is chosen as having been sent, on a mission away from what he's comfortable with, and they have been chosen. And the thing that we know from church history is that Peter at some point spent quite a bit of time in Rome. That he was on the run somewhat as well, not necessarily on the run, but he was had to escape, and he was in Rome, and then also at times was potentially banished from Rome, but he eventually died there. History says that he died probably when he was martyred in the year 64, when Nero was the emperor. Now, what's the time frame of what he's writing here? We're not exactly sure. There's later in the epistle, he talks about this fiery ordeal that you're going through. Is that an exact reference to what was happening under Nero? It could be. It could be quite a very literal reference to what was going on. We know that at one point, Nero was basically making candles. Roman candles were believers that were set on fire throughout the city. Pretty horrific stuff when we talk about persecution for the name of Yeshua. I don't think we really have a clue. When you talk about a fiery ordeal potentially being a literal fiery ordeal, that's a whole thing, right? And that's a significant persecution. And what he's going to talk about as we go through here is that all of this is working to purify your faith, and we'll get to that. But he uses this phrase then, so chosen, and then he says, to the sojourners, chosen, sojourners of the diaspora, and then names all these places. So sojourners is parapidemos, which is foreigners, sojourners, strangers. The term parapidemoi was used in the first century to designate someone who did not hold citizenship in the place where he resided, and he was therefore a foreigner. He's an outsider. He's an immigrant. You're in a place that they don't want you necessarily, or you don't fit. Abraham called himself, when you read it in the Septuagint being the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible, he called him, used this word. They used this word to translate when he said he was an alien. He was a sojourner among the Hittites in Genesis 23:4. And there are implications when you're a sojourner, when you're not home. You don't all enjoy. First of all, if you don't have citizenship, you don't enjoy all the rights and the privileges of citizens. You don't have the mindset of the place in which you are. You don't necessarily hold the values, and you're an outsider. You're a sojourner. This is not your home. You don't necessarily hold the values and the practices, the customs of those that you're surrounded by the host culture. You're an alien in that society, and because of those kinds of differences, you stand out. You think about, like right now, when we over the last year, we've heard a lot about sickness, right, and the virus. And a virus is viewed within the body as, and it doesn't belong there. When you have a sickness, it doesn't belong there. It's an alien. And so the body says, I got to get that out of here. This is affecting me. It's hurting me. It's killing me. And so so the body then turns violently against it, and the intensity can depend on how different this thing is in you. The body is seeking to heal itself. But now take that to another perspective, and you have a sick world but doesn't see itself as sick. And when we're in the midst of it, walking as the Lord wants us to walk, and that we will often be viewed as we don't fit, we don't belong, and it can be doing, it will want to expel us when we make it uncomfortable. We affect the way everything's working. And so because of the differences, foreigners were often outsiders, sojourners were looked on suspiciously as potentially subversive to the way things go, the established social order. You don't understand, this is the way things work here. And so the phrase, "your chosen sojourners," it becomes this kind of two-word opening sermon. You're sojourners, not just in an earthly sense, but spiritually. Paul talks about our citizenship in Philippians 3:20. Our citizenship is in heaven, but you're chosen, and you've been, and you're strangers. But it's not somehow an accident. And all that you're facing isn't something that the Lord doesn't know. So you're chosen, sojourners, dispersed, the word diasporos. And so that we know the word diaspora means dispersed or scattered. And so Jews that were outside of the homeland, and even to this day, outside of Israel, are considered diaspora, scattered throughout the nations. And so you've been scattered, dispersed, and now it names 5 places: in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. Now I've got a map here that we can look at just briefly. And so this is basically Turkey. This is basically Turkey today. And you can see this is, I'm sorry, you're going to full screen it? Okay, so you can see at the top, if you would have come in, if you land on the east side, someone comes via the Black Sea, and they were to go there, Pontus, and then down to Galatia, and then on the right side of the screen, you see on the east Cappadocia, and then you kind of turn around, and then going into Asia, and then back up to Bithynia and Pontus, kind of make a circle here. That a letter would have been sent and would have probably come one of those 2 ways. But since it's listed in this order, it's likely it would have gone through the region in that order. And what's interesting is that a lot of this area is an area that that you can go off the main screen, but a lot of this area is an area that you'll remember in Acts chapter 16, where the Holy Spirit, Paul wanted to go up into Bithynia, and the Holy Spirit stopped him. There was a no to that, and so that area, and he wanted to go down into where Ephesus was, and it was kind of a not yet on that, and he ended up going to Philippi. But we do know that somehow the gospel did get to this area that that Peter's speaking to here. Now, the question is, and this is what I want to take a few more minutes on this morning, it has to do with sojourners. So what had happened under Augustus? So this is early on in the Roman Empire. Under Augustus, he had begun a policy of Roman colonization. So as the Romans would conquer and then annex lands into Rome, it was critical. You hadn't just annexed them, but it was now important that nation become a part of Rome. Well, how is that going to happen? They need to be Romanized, right? There was basically cultural imperialism, where they needed to be Romanized. And so there began a policy of colonization, so that there would be benefits for people in Rome to go to an area that had been conquered, and they want to establish civic institutions. They want it to begin to look Roman, to feel Roman, to introduce Roman language, Roman culture, politics to the natives there. And they also, by being there, by having colonies, they would have strategic military presence especially on the edges, on the frontier. And then it also opened the door for commerce. So it was important that as they were expanding, that they kind of unify these colonies, into kind of one overall empire. And so this was all the different emperors would do this on varying degrees. The Emperor Claudius, who ruled from 41 to 54, he was well known for this. He probably left some of his greatest legacy was in Asia Minor and his establishment of cities and roads in particular in this region that Peter is writing to. All 5 of the region named in 1 Peter 1 here were established when Claudius, as Roman cities Roman areas during Claudius's reign. And so when they would populate the colonies, some colonists wanted to go. This was an opportunity for upward mobility. If you're in Rome and you're kind of a nobody, you're never going to ascend into this echelon of people economically. This was your shot. This was your shot to hit the frontier. I mean, you think of kind of when as America expanded, that same kind of idea. You would be given an opportunity to go to a place, and you're given land, and the thing is, when you're given land, guess what's happening? Someone is losing land. When you're given property, someone is losing property. When you're given authority in a place that you're not native to, someone who is native there has lost authority. So you have that element going on. There were those that were going as colonists, but they were viewed as invaders. Native populations didn't want them there. I mean, that's naturally. And so they were often violent toward them. And so one of the things that the Roman Empire would do to kind of protect their colonists was they would give them full kind of increasing measures of Roman citizenship. Hold on a second. My phone is just blowing up for some reason. They would give them Roman citizenship. And that was sort of as a protection. So they would, and again, this was an opportunity for them to, within a generation or two, that they could be kind of their family, their generations could be elite local leadership. So there were those that wanted to go. But then there were people who didn't want to go, who didn't want to colonize these places. It wasn't uncommon for the emperor or a group from the Senate in the Roman Senate to deport a group of people who were viewed as troublemakers. If they're messing with kind of the sense of Roman, you've heard of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, then they would be sent to some remote area of the empire. They would be expelled. And again, sometimes there were whole populations, groups of people that were forced to leave. They either because they were, a few different reasons, they were perceived as disruptive to the Roman peace. They had to leave because the emperor had decided to take their lands. They were expelled at times because they were not valued, and if there was a food shortage, well, we can't give them the food, so let's send them elsewhere. There were a lot of different reasons that people were expelled, but the common feature among them was they were viewed as outsiders. They were viewed as foreigners, sojourners. They were sent out. They wouldn't have sent out Roman citizens. Only those Roman citizens who wanted to go would go, but outsiders would be expelled. So Rome doesn't want them, and the native indigenous cultures where they're being sent to, they don't want them. And so, again, they become targets, and they don't necessarily have the protection of citizenship that the Romans that are there have. And even some who had Roman citizenship, it didn't mean you were rich. You could still be quite poor. Roman citizenship is a complicated issue. And so, therefore, the word foreigner could be applied to different people in different contexts. So Claudius, though, he was not just known for colonizing. He was also, for political reasons, he was also a champion of the Roman gods. and I'll just take a few more minutes this morning. Again, I don't mean to bog us down with historical background, but he wanted to make sure that there was sort of a consolidation of the Roman gods. It was good for the empire, for the Roman way, for that kind of religious policy.
We're reconnecting right now, so it was just a few moments ago, so start at 15 minutes ago.
Okay. All right. I think am I back? Okay. So I'm not sure where I left off. So I don't know why our streaming crashed for a second. Oh, it disconnected. Okay. Okay. So beginning with Augustus, let me just kind of the expansion over the empire over other cultures. They needed to have some sort of unity, and so what they did, that while they wanted to have tolerance for other kind of superstitions, they called them, for other religions, these religions couldn't affect what they deemed as important. So the cardinal point of the policy was they would be hospitality to foreign religions, but they were considered a menace the moment they took advantage of that courtesy to disrupt the public peace, to offend accepted morals, or to engage in converting native Romans. And so, I mean, look, this happened to not just believers. This happened with those who, when the Romans invaded Britain, they outlawed it, Druidism, because of its practice of human sacrifice. When people began to prefer Egyptian astrologers to the native, and Babylonian astrologers to the native Italian diviners, they were expelled as well. But the most famous Roman expulsion occurred during the reign of Claudius, toward the end of the 5th decade of the 50s. The Roman historian Suetonius tells us this. It says, since the Jews constantly made disturbances at the instigation of Chrestus, he, Claudius, expelled them from Rome. So he was expelling the Jews, like the whole mess. He didn't want any of it. So it would be Jews, and that included Jewish believers. And this distinction wasn't often made clear. They were kicked out of Rome. So part of the issue, by the way, that you have in the book of Romans, in the letter to the Romans, is that you have Romans who are Jews who had been expelled and then were now returning. And so now you're figuring out, how do Jewish believers and Gentile believers operate together in unity? That's part of the historical context for what's happened in the book of Romans. So Jews are being sent out. They're being and believers themselves are really viewed with a negative eye because they're being evangelistic. I mean, they're disturbing the public peace. Their morals, we view Christian morals as conservative, obviously, as good, but this is not a Judeo-Christian society, and so it was offensive to the pagan religions, to the Roman religion. It was a problem because the morals were so different. It was radically different. And then they were engaging in converting native Romans. So that was not looked upon with a good eye. So you have now Jews, and he's talking to Jewish believers who have been expelled and who will probably be sent to colonize this place. They've been sent from where they're at to a place where they don't want to be, and to a place that doesn't want them. And what they faced, what they went through on every kind of level was difficult. And we'll see that here in 1 Peter. And again, Peter probably, because he had been in Rome for quite a while, would have had a relationship with these believers. They would have known who he was. Obviously, he was one of the 12, and he is Peter. So when he knows them and then he writes to them, he's writing to them with a pastoral heart. Here he is. Remember, this is how he's going to show how he's going to show Yeshua his love. Do you love me? Feed my lambs. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Take care of my sheep. Right? This is pastoral. This is him saying to these sheep, these sojourners, now who are literally foreigners, literal exiles. And then it expands because there's an understanding that we're all exiles. So he's basically saying, hey, this is from one exile, one sojourner to another. I was chosen as a sent out one to you, chosen as sojourners where you are. None of us are at home. So how do we live? How do we walk in this place? How are we to navigate all of this? How are we to navigate these ordeals that we're facing? And again, they're facing things that are very real. When we went through the letters to the congregations in Revelation, a lot of what they were facing you deal with, where if they're not part of these guilds, that they can't get work. So you're facing deep poverty. And so he writes this letter to them. It says, you were chosen. And he names all the places where they are. Verse 2. We're almost done. According to the foreknowledge of God the Father. You know what? And we'll pick back up after that tomorrow. But I want to say this. We're going to talk about, you're where you are, he says. And God knew you'd be there. You've been chosen according to the word is basically, it's the prognosis in Greek. Prognosis, to know beforehand, to know in advance. The Lord knew. You may not have known you were going to be in this circumstance. You may not want to be where you are. You may not want to be facing what you're facing. But I, as one who find remember what remember what the story at the end of the book of John's Gospel, when Peter and Yeshua are walking, and Yeshua tells him, hey, Satan is asked to sift you like wheat. Yay. And Peter, and he tells him, you're going to be led to a place you don't want to go. And you're going to, basically, you're going to suffer. You're not going to want this. And Peter looks back at John and says, what about him? And he says, that's not your problem. It's not your business. If he gets to live to a ripe old age and die a natural death, I'm not talking to him. I'm talking to you. What about them? What about them? He says, no. This is what you've got to walk through. Why? I don't know. So Peter's had to submit himself to this understanding that the Lord knows what he's going to be facing. And so now he's saying to these that are now they're foreigners, scattered, outsiders. He's saying, look, I get it. I get it. God knows. You're there not by accident. You're there according to the it's not like the foreknowledge, like everything. This is not about a theological argument. People want to take these words and turn them into arguments about predestination and free will and all of that stuff. You can have those discussions. But that's really not, when Peter's writing this, what he's writing as a pastoral letter is to say the junk you're facing, the stuff you're going through, isn't catching the Lord by surprise. The Lord knew you'd be right here in a place you don't want to be. And he's sending people into your path. To this you were called. Stop focusing on you not wanting to be where you're at and focus on what do you want me to do in the place that you've placed me. The Lord is using this place where you don't want to be to form something in you. And again, we'll see that later through the first chapter. You've been placed here. And God knew. Chosen and scattered according to the foreknowledge of God. You're not here by accident. Chosen by your Father, he says, by your heavenly Father. Right? It's not just chosen, but he uses the word Father, speaking of as the Father who loves you, who sees you, who knows you. He's got you. You're afraid, you're terrified, you don't understand what's going on, but don't worry, the Lord's got you. He knows right where you are. He hasn't lost track of you. He's got you here. He's set you apart. And so let's just stop there for today, halfway through verse 2. Well, just the beginning of verse 2. We'll go at a faster rate than that. But your historical setting is not an accident. It's like when when Mordecai told his niece or his cousin, told Hadassah, you're not here by accident. Perhaps God has allowed you to be here. Perhaps you're here for such a time as this. You're right where you're at for this time. Oh, I don't want to be here in this time, going through this, locked into this, facing this. Well, hey, from one sojourner to another, from one outsider to another outsider, the Lord knows. So how do we live and how do we walk in the midst of that? And that's what we're going to be looking at in 1 Peter. All right? All right. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.